Good morning, I'm Jason Johnson, sitting and standing in for Tiffany Cross. We start the cross connection with day 2 of President Biden's first G7 summit across the pond. Biden is meeting with world leaders as we speak, including with French President Emmanuel Macron in any moment. We'll bring that to you live. Tomorrow, the president and first lady will meet again with Queen Elizabeth, this time on her turf at Windsor Castle. This all comes before Biden departs for the NATO summit in Belgium, followed by his first face-to-face meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday. Here with the latest from the UK is NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley. Matt, good morning.
Good morning, Joshua. So, yeah, this is the first real day of the G7, the second day, basically. But this is when we're going to start to see some actual working real sessions, actual meetings behind closed doors for the most part. That's all happening not right behind me, but kind of the next bay over. And that's when we're going to start to see with Macron. He's going to be meeting the French president. And all of this, again, this is all about Joe Biden essentially making his kind of debut as president on the world stage and kind of renewing America's vows toward multilateralism, international institutions, and really sort of the what they would call the liberal world order, the one that has essentially ensured a lot of global peace since World War II. That is what Joe Biden is here to do. He's trying to say diplomacy is back and America is back with a new role in the world. Now, a lot of this, of course, is surrounded by awkward photo opportunities, meetings with the Queen, who's made her own couple of jokes, and tonight there's going to be marshmallows and hot rum, steak and lobster on the beach. So you might be able to see some really important global leaders snacking, chatting with each other, maybe walking around barefoot. So it should be quite a nice one to see. And then, like you said, President Biden is going to be taking off for London to meet and sip tea with the Queen. Joshua?
Well, Matt, actually, I'm Jason. Joshua's the other guy. He doesn't wear a tie. But I want to ask about sort of today's agenda. No problem. I want to ask about today's agenda. So, you know, the way you describe it, there's beaches, there's marshmallows, but what is being talked about today? What does infrastructure mean to the G7? What is the G7 saying about China? And how are they sort of collectively having discussions about the pandemic response? Who's stepping up and who's sort of slacking in the G7 as far as what you're hearing right now?
Well, I mean, a lot of this G7 is really just about trying to go against sort of the Putins of the world, the Xi Jinpings of the world. That's one of the things that Joe Biden has made his priority. And, you know, when he talks about that, in the rearview mirror is Donald Trump. And that's what a lot of world leaders here are going to be remembering. He's trying to say that he is not Donald Trump, that he's turning a page from that and moving on. And so that's why when it comes to confronting and reaffirming America's commitment to these global institutions, a lot of this, the subtext is about the Vladimir Putins of the world, who he's going to be meeting again in Geneva on Wednesday. The top discussion items, especially today, are going to be the pandemic and climate change. And on those topics, Joe Biden feels he really can demonstrate that multilateralism is the way to go, that this is how you're going to be proceeding, that America needs partners, needs friends, and that these two big issues, especially the pandemic, which obviously is essentially still going on, these demonstrate, if nothing else, the need for these sorts of institutions, the kind that, you know, Donald Trump spent a lot of time disparaging.
Matt, thank you so much. We are about to go live. President Biden is about to sit down one-on-one with French President Emmanuel Macron. Let's go in and take a listen.
The U.S. president, part of the club, and very willing to cooperate. And I think that what you demonstrate is that leadership is partnership, and we do appreciate. And I think we can deliver great things for that.
I think we can do a lot too. The United States, I've said before, we're back. The U.S. is back. We feel very, very strongly about the cohesion of NATO, and I, for one, think that the European Union is an incredibly strong and vibrant entity that has a lot to do with the ability of Western Europe to not only handle its economic issues, but provide the backbone and the support for NATO. And so we're very supportive, very supportive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Let's go. Thank you, guys. Let's go. Thank you. Guys, let's go. Thank you. Let's go.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that was Emmanuel Macron, French President Emmanuel Macron, having a conversation with Joe Biden. We're going to talk about that and what else is happening at this second day of the G7 summit. Joining me now to discuss, Chris Jansing, MSNBC anchor and senior national correspondent, and Bobby Ghosh, editor and columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. Chris, I'll start with you. I'm just going to bring up the poll numbers. The poll numbers seem to show that globally, America is back, that the rest of the world is more comfortable with us as Joe Biden is president. But from what you're picking up and what you've been talking and hearing from people, is that just because he's not Donald Trump, or is there some specific level of comfort and trust that Europe seems to have with Joe Biden?
Well, look, I think it's a little bit of both. And certainly if you look even deeper into that poll, you see, for example, in Germany, I think it's 80% trust the president to do the right thing on the global stage. It was about 10% for Donald Trump. So that comparison doesn't do well for Donald Trump. Having said that, I think what we've already seen on this stage, and you heard Macron and the president already addressing this, is that part of what they're doing is showing up and just sending a message through all these visuals that these alliances do matter, that they're going to go on to NATO, and that these partnerships can work, that America's democracy, that America and the other democracies, the leading democracies of the world, can work together. But in terms of Donald Trump, he does overshadow so much, because there's a second part of this that really deals with whether or not America can be trusted. They may trust the president, but they look and say 3.5 years down the road, is there still a policy there that could be trusted? Because we've all watched what has happened. We've seen it with the Paris Climate Accord. I was there when that was done. I was also working to cover the Obama White House during the Iran nuclear accords, things that the president, former President Trump got rid of, including getting out of the WHO. So there is a larger question and a larger assurance that he has to make, especially at a time when there's other polls out that also show that a huge number of Republicans still believe that Donald Trump should have been elected president. So there's a complicating factor there when you look at those polls about what the big picture is and how Donald Trump continues to cast a shadow.
I want to follow up with that very quickly, Chris. So to the rest of the world, are you hearing people at the G7, or are people still saying, hey, by the way, you guys had an attempted coup a couple months ago? How's that going? Because you would think that the rest of the world might look at everything that Joe Biden is saying and, as you said, still have some concerns about domestic stability in the United States. Are you hearing that?
Well, that's certainly what Vladimir Putin, who, as you mentioned, the president is going to be meeting with, would like people to think. And there is concern about this, not so much the stability of the democracy, but the stability of the political situation. We know that there is a huge political divide. We know that divide has only gotten wider. We know that the opposition has made it very difficult to work together and move forward on some of these things. Many of the things that the president has done already, the things he's talking about doing, he may have to do just with Democrats. So there is concern about that. I don't want to overstate it, but I don't think you can dismiss it either.
So speaking of the sort of the big 400-pound elephant that everybody's concerned about for next Wednesday, Bobby, I want to play you some sound about Vladimir Putin's initial thoughts about Joe Biden. We'll talk about it when we come back.
We have a bilateral relationship that has deteriorated to its lowest point in recent years. Former U.S. President, Mr. Trump, is an extraordinary individual, talented individual. President Biden, of course, is radically different from Trump, and it is my great hope that, yes, there are some advantages, some disadvantages.
Now, you couldn't see in the camera all the puppet strings that Putin still had for Donald Trump, but looking forward to next week, this big meeting between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin, what can we take from Putin's sort of initial statements, and should we have any high expectations for what can be accomplished or what the reset might be when these two world leaders meet next Wednesday?
No, I wouldn't have very high expectations. That is Putin basically reminding us that I'm still here. And he's done that not only in an interview, but also in his actions over the last several weeks leading up to the meeting by declaring opposition groups as extremists and by basically refusing to stand down on any of the issues that he knows Biden is going to bring up with him on Ukraine, on Belarus, on cyber attacks against American institutions and companies. There is absolutely no sign that Vladimir Putin is ready to make any sort of concessions, and why should he? Which is why it's important for Biden to get, before he reaches that point where he meets with Putin, to get the Western consensus firmly behind him. And that's been the plan all along. That's why it's G7 first, then NATO, a meeting in London before that with the Brits, closest allies in Europe, and then he goes to see Putin. And Putin will recognize that he's dealing with a different kind of leader here. He may remember fondly Donald Trump. He will certainly remember how easily he could pull the wool over Donald Trump's eyes. He'll know that he can't do that with Joe Biden. And it'll be a cagey affair. It'll be like the traditional meetings in the old days between Soviet leaders and American leaders, where the hugs, there'll be no hugs, the smiles would be plastic, the handshakes would be firm, but not a whole lot would be actually revealed and given away.
And Jason, if I can, I think it's important to note that we just learned this morning that there is not going to be a joint press conference. There is not going to be the kind of situation that Bobby referred to in Helsinki, where the president accepted Vladimir Putin's word for the fact that, he had nothing to do with interference in the 2016 election. So clearly this administration is saying, we're not going to have any of that. The president is going to come out after that meeting. He'll hold his press conference one-on-one. They're establishing that there is a very significant difference on very many levels from this administration from the last.
So there's a thing that basically Joe Biden has to straddle here, right? Which is the difference between establishing, hey, look, we're not going to put up with bounties. We're not going to put up with any more election interference, but also changing relationships between Russia and Europe. You've got the NS2 pipeline, which is going from Russia to Germany, that initially the United States said there was going to be a problem, but Germany's like, hey, we need their oil. Bobby, I'm curious, how is Joe Biden going to be able to come out of this meeting and tell the rest of Europe, hey, he's a bad guy, even though in some ways European relationships with Russia are slightly less frosty than they used to be, maybe even 8 years ago?
Well, the Europeans don't need reminding from Biden. Putin is constantly reminding them that he's a bad guy, but they have the Russian bear, to use the old cliche, right in their backyard. And they know that they have to deal with Putin. They know Putin's not going anywhere. And as you pointed out, there are strong energy connections that they know they need. And that's Biden's problem, that on the one hand, he needs the Europeans to be firmly behind the United States, but the Europeans are not that firm at the moment. They've used the Trump years as an excuse to some degree to say, look, the Americans are not reliable. But the fact is that these energy connections predate Trump and will continue long after all the people who posed for those pictures on the beach have passed from the scene. The straddling that you mentioned, the difficulty is actually on the side of the Europeans. Biden can take a firm position. Putin can take a firm position. It's the Europeans who are in a complicated situation. They need the American security umbrella through NATO. They need the American economy and the access to the American economy. But at the same time, they do need Russian gas. Certainly the Germans do. And they know that the Russians are sitting right there taking bite-sized pieces of Europe, as in Ukraine. Who knows what happens next in Belarus. So they're the ones who have to have this really awkward relationship with a difficult neighbor.
In a global environment of frenemies, former friends, and new friends, it seems like another big name on the horizon and a huge discussion, Chris, at this G7 is China. Now, the United States sees China as both a military and an economic threat. Some of the European countries may see them as an economic threat, not necessarily as much of a cultural one. And that's before you even talk about China's sort of long-term investment that's been going on in sub-Saharan Africa for the last 10 or 15 years. What are you hearing right now about what Biden is trying to sell the rest of the world about China? Is he saying, look, we got to worry about them militarily? Is he saying we've got to block them for intellectual property theft? What's his message right now about China?
Well, those things, and it's very clear that this is going to be a centerpiece of his foreign policy and the idea that he's tried to be more aggressive toward China. But look, there are any number of complicating factors besides what you mentioned and the fact that there are issues with Taiwan, with human rights. What you know from Europe is that those trading partnerships are strong. You have, for example, with Germany, they literally sell millions of cars to China. So the trading situation, the economic partnerships make it much more fraught for the European nations that Joe Biden is going to be trying to convince. And both sides know, whether it's the EU or it's Canada or it's President Biden, that without China, one of the key things that they want to get done here, which is some action on global warming, doesn't get done. If you don't have China as part of that partnership, it doesn't have the impact that it needs to have. And I think one of the things you're going to be watching very closely is that the president would like to have a very strong statement on forced labor. It's not clear that the other members of the G7 are willing to go on board and put that in writing. So we're going to watch how this all unfolds, but it's clear from the very start and even from when he was running for president that this is a centerpiece, something that Joe Biden feels very strongly about and wants to take an aggressive stance against China.
Thank you, Bobby Ghosh and Chris Jansing. Thank you so much.